We start in the Middle East, and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is escalating. Jean Zlaaka, spokesperson for the UN Humanitarian Office, says the situation is catastrophic. Basic services are collapsing, with food, water and medical aid remaining out of reach for many. Let's have a listen to what the spokesperson for the UN Humanitarian Office has said.
Would be a bit of a repetition. As we have explained many times, we do not participate in this modality for the reasons that we have given. It is a distraction from what is actually needed, which is a reopening of all the crossings into Gaza, a secure environment within Gaza.
In addition, Juliette Touma from the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees warns that conditions are unbearable. She says schools used as shelters have been hit, calling for immediate protection of civilians. Let's have a listen to Juliette Touma and what she said on aid.
What I do know, however, is that the needs are 500 to 600 trucks at a minimum that should go into Gaza loaded with supplies, not only food, but also medicine, medical supplies, vaccines for children, fuel, water, and other basics for people's survival. And we're very, very, very far from reaching that target.
Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes continue. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vows to bring hostages home. He says the military campaign will not stop until that goal is met. The EU chief Ursula von der Leyen has condemned Israel's strikes on civilian sites in Gaza, calling them abhorrent. She demands respect for international law. On the diplomatic front, the US envoy Steve Witkoff denies that Hamas has accepted a ceasefire deal. Negotiations remain deadlocked. A US-backed aid group has also begun distributing supplies into Gaza. The operation faces huge challenges, but officials say it's a critical first step. Well, joining us to discuss all of these latest developments is Ahmed Fatou, a spokesperson for the FATA movement, who's joining us from Ramallah. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us, Ahmed. Let's look at the diplomatic calls that have been coming in over the ongoing humanitarian crisis that takes place within Gaza. Do you think that world leaders and groups like the UN are doing enough to talk about the situation that's ongoing in the enclave?
Thank you for having me. There are a global demand right now to end this genocide immediately. Enough after near 20 months of mass killing the Palestinian people in a war that is apparently aimless, because Netanyahu is only doing this war for his own political interest or to please the far right of Israel, which want to exterminate the Palestinian people and drive the ethnic cleansing, which has declared many times on TV, on Israeli TVs, which named the Greater Israel. Now the war demands abidance to international law and to the humanitarian law. Israel failed to fulfill any of that for the past 20 months. On the opposite, they are intensifying the bombardment. Just yesterday, they targeted a school turned refugee, a Gerjawi school, burning children alive. The images that emerged from that massacre was catastrophic. That image of a child between the fire running for safety to survive was enough for every human being on this planet to stand up and say to Israel, enough is enough, stop your genocide right now. The EU has clearly stated that they refuse what Israel is doing and they need to stop the war immediately. The UN, of course, has reiterated many times about the catastrophic situation, the humanitarian catastrophe in Palestine, which is not only food, by the way, as the UN leader said, it is also the medical shortages. There's a scarce in medicine, medical equipment in Gaza, and many people, patients who are in need of daily dosages of medicine for chronic diseases are dying out of this blockade. This is added to the number of civilians killed directly from the Israeli bombs and bullets. So the number of above 53,000 Palestinians killed is actually going to be much higher than we expect, because if we count those who died indirectly from the war, it could reach, catastrophic numbers. The aid that was entered to Gaza is not enough. Also, we have to point out that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is not neutral, is not for humanity, and its CEO has actually resigned, saying that it lacks the humanitarian principles. It is obvious a weapon. It was weaponized to drive the Palestinian out of Gaza. It does not provide enough aid. It does not provide enough points of distribution. The Palestinian has to travel long distances.
Yes.
And it's guarded by Israeli soldiers and American soldiers. That is not for humanity. That is for a colonial ambition.
Ahmed, just have to briefly acknowledge that Israel denies that a genocide is being committed, but I want to move forward and look at Hamas in this situation. Israel say that aid has been blocked and they're worried about it getting into the hands of Hamas. Also, given the fact that hostages are still not being released, given the situation in Gaza currently, does more pressure from within Gaza need to be put on Hamas to work towards ending this conflict?
I think this is false claims. If many experts has already clarified that Netanyahu is not after the hostages, because as we have witnessed by evidence that a few weeks of negotiation in January has released the majority of the hostages. Hostages are naturally released by negotiations, not by fire and bomb. In fact, one of the hostages just said recently that she feared the bombardment of its Israeli army more than the Hamas fighters who are taking her as a hostage. Also, we have to speak about the Palestinian hostages that has been arrested for the past 20 months. Thousands of children, women, elders, civilians has been imprisoned without any legal court, without any conviction, only to be held and tortured and raped to death.
Yes, Ahmed, I do want to come back to the hostages that Hamas are holding. I understand what you're saying, but for balance, it's important that we acknowledge that there are dead hostages being held by Hamas, which is uncommon in ongoing wars. But there also has been opportunity and discussions that were held after the first round of the ceasefire, the first phase. It seems that a deal couldn't be agreed, and Israel's stance is we want all hostages to be released. Given the humanitarian situation in Gaza, you're saying that Israel obviously are to blame, but is there some blame that should be apportioned on Hamas, and should there be more action from people within Gaza to look at Hamas and potentially see if they could have any influence over it?
The voice is not really clear, but from what I understood, you asked me if the hostages issue that Hamas is holding dead hostages. By the way, Israel is holding dead Palestinian bodies from years by now. You know, by the Israeli colonial laws, that if a Palestinian prisoner dies and his time is not ended, he remains in prison. His body remains in prison until his time finishes. That is the most fascist law that I ever seen. We have tens of Palestinian bodies confiscated in Israel. But anyway, going back to what's going on in Gaza, now Hamas said they have accepted the Witkoff proposal.
Which the US denies, Ahmed. What I'm trying to get to and what I want to talk about is the responsibility, if you think there is any, on Hamas, not just for the October 7th attacks, but the ongoing situation.
The voice is not really clear.
Ahmed, what I'm trying to say is we're looking at a situation here where there is an impasse from both sides. Clearly, a deal has not been agreed, but what I want to look at is the responsibility on Hamas as well. Do you think that there should be some responsibility placed on Hamas for the current humanitarian situation within Gaza?
How I could blame Hamas when the one who is blocking the aid is Israel? How you want me to? By the way, I'm from FATA, and we have major differences with Hamas, and we have major issues with Hamas. I do understand that, but how you wish to, for anyone actually, not only me, to blame Hamas when the one who is closing the block or blocking the aid is Israel? They are the perpetrators. It's not Hamas. And in any way, by the law, by international humanitarian law, no one should use starvation as a method of war, neither against Palestinians nor against Hamas or anyone. This is against the law. This is immoral. This is illegal. Israel is to blame first and foremost for its 77 years of occupation and brutal occupation that kills and murders and refused peace. Two-state solution has been signed in 1993. If we ask every political experts in this planet, they will tell you it's Israel to blame for blocking peace for the past 77 years. And I told you just recently how they confiscate Palestinian bodies for years, some of them for 30 years now. Where is that from the media? But we only see one side and we ignore the other side. The other side, which is sponsored and deeply funded by the Western imperial powers, is doing crime against humanity, not today, not yesterday, from the past 77 years. And only now people are starting to watch it because of social media, finally, that crossed the walls of conventional media. In any case, peace is achieved by ceasefire, not by fire. And we all have witnessed recently that Israel is renewed the war and reinitiated the war, by the way. We all see it. It's not to blame Hamas or to blame anyone else. Israel renewed the war. Netanyahu said, I want war under fire. Recently, the leader of the opposition Democrats say Israel is killing children as a hobby. I don't know how many evidences we need to find in order to say Israel is to blame. And Israel is the one who's receiving thousands of tons of arms that is shooting and burning children alive. What is needed right now is immediate ceasefire and go to negotiations to release all hostages and to release the Palestinian hostages as well. And for the Palestinian Authority to go back to Gaza, not Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, and that is the legitimate authority under the PLO, which is the sole representative of the Palestinian people in the international community. And then we can go for two-state solution, because we have to face the inevitable here. The crisis is not an issue between Israel and Hamas, it is an issue between occupation and the occupied. And that when that is resolved, then we would have peace and no more hostages will be taken by anyone, which, by the way, we refuse any sort of violence as a FATA. We refuse all kinds of violence, but we would blame first and foremost the Israeli occupation that is using violence as a mean of politics, and that is refused.
Yes, absolutely. Ahmed Fatou, thank you ever so much for providing your insights and opinions there. We will, of course, be across all of the developments with hostages held and a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The developments and impasse will continue to be discussed here on NewsX World. We do now bring you some breaking news, as Russia's foreign ministry stated that European countries